Good morning, wicked early morning. This is a another show coming at you from Film Fanatic headquarters. This is a extra early show. I had to get up at an ungodly hour today for an appointment, so I'm up. Got a little bit of time to kill while I'm getting ready and starting to get myself wakey bakey, get myself up here. And it's about 5 in the morning, so it's Friday morning. Hope everyone's doing good. So yeah, I don't usually do shows this early, but I'm up and I got some time to kill. I'm slowly waking up, so I figure, what the hell? Why not do a video? So I want to thank everybody for, checking out the videos. It's it's been really, it's been a blast. I do a video every day. I usually do them every morning, mid afternoon, but I tend to do them all in the morning. You know, I don't usually tend to do them this early, but I figured I will probably won't have time later to do it. So, and I love doing it. I love that every video I seem to put out and upload, seems to garner more attention. We're over 200 now as far as subscribers, at 206 or 7 now. So it's been really cool. When I first started tackling this channel a little bit more, and again, it's something I've said before, but one of the things about YouTube that I was kind of reluctant as far as diving into it was I had heard through, well, mostly I had heard from other people that I knew that were starting YouTube channels. I had heard from a lot of people that it's hard to, to basically get hits and to get people to check out your page, and it's a lot harder, like say compared to Facebook. Like if you have, you know, a business page, or if you have a, like bands have Facebook pages now, and if you have like if you're selling your art, or interests, whether you have a page about books that you like or movies that you like or all those kinds of things. And I've had my Film Fanatic page on Facebook now for quite a few years, probably about 5 years maybe, and it's it's pretty easy for the most part on Facebook, for the most part, to get attention, to get people to like your page or to get people to follow your page. And I noticed about a year ago, especially when I started to dive into uh, doing videos, when I started doing the Facebook Live videos, I noticed that really helped a lot as far as garnering attention. But I always knew and saw that you could get, for not a whole lot of work. I mean, obviously sharing posts and all those kinds of things are pretty vital to making your page grow and to get your voice out there. But it just seemed, for the most part, doing that on through Facebook, purely Facebook, was relatively easy as far as getting some kind of base of an audience or attention. And I had always heard, well, YouTube, it's more of like this giant kind of black hole to a degree, or like you're in this massive space, and there's you know millions of other people doing the same thing, and it's really hard because you're not you know whereas like if you're on Facebook and people who are friends that follow you or whatnot, they will immediately see links or things that you're posting on your page, on your business page, or whatnot, and they'll instantly probably check out your page, for those kinds of things, and so you already have like a kind of an audience. Like for instance, like on my Facebook page, I have quite a few people that I'm friends with. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people I don't actually know, And some people have that where, and I understand the whole thing around Facebook and social media is I think there's really, well, like anything, there's really great aspects to it, and there's other things that are kind of terrible and not so great. I think Facebook and social media is really great. Like for instance, one example for me is that's usually how I hear about shows, events, and bands that I like, or if bands have a string of tour dates, or there's just events going on locally. That's usually how I come across all those things, and I kind of stay on top of even on a small scale, but like local happenings. Certain bands that I really love that are local. That's usually how I hear about it, or certain venues that I like, or certain bars, or microbreweries, or whatever it is. That's usually how I stay up on hearing about events that are coming up. And it's pretty easy, and it's a pretty cool way because things have transitioned so much to social media. But I find in that way, it's pretty easy to stay, to kind of mark your calendar as far as if there's you find some things that are pretty cool and worth checking out. Movies that I like that or movies that I want to see, or it can be anything. And I notice like certain folks that have gotten off of Facebook, like one of my best friends, he, and I know a lot of people have their things that they don't like about Facebook because of privacy issues, and of course that's a serious thing to really think about and to weigh into, because that is an issue. But I know a few people because of some of the things that have happened through Facebook that are very controversial and not very not not very copacetic. They've basically deleted their account, or they've put it to sleep, and they don't they essentially don't use it anymore. And one of my good friends, Mike Whitehead, who plays bass in Quantum, he was on Facebook for a long time, and he would use it for personal things, but mainly he would use it for music stuff, kind of like what I would do, or and what I do, you know. But and we used to go out all the time to see music and go to events, and we do that still, but not as much, unfortunately. So, but he does not have, like, he's not on Facebook anymore, and so he misses he always tells me how he misses all of these events. Like he didn't know that this thing was happening or is coming up, and he kind of kicks himself a lot of the times for not like staying in touch with that, when at one point he did, and he knew, he was aware of all these things. Like one example, which I thought was pretty funny. There's a venue right by his house, which is this big venue, and they've been doing music there, and it's literally like 2 minutes from his house, and they've been having lots of events there, and they're trying to turn this particular place into a regular venue. And I've only heard about those developments, or have heard about those shows because of Facebook, and he has not heard about any of these things, and he just gets kind of angry that he doesn't stay in touch with that aspect of it, because there's still things that are in the papers, like the Free Press and other publications, and the radio still has, particularly like WERU, they have an events calendar and things like that, and people still occasionally put up physical flyers. That's still a thing to a degree, but not as much as it was, like, say, 4 years ago. Even it's changed so much. But mostly I see events on Facebook, mostly Facebook, and then Instagram, and various other platforms. The other aspect of Facebook that really sucks is the people using it as a personal diary, and then people getting people kind of using their laptop or their phone as, like, where they like to try to bully people, and then also, like, put out all of these incredibly personal things on Facebook, and create, and they love to create social drama and all of this controversy just for the sake of getting attention. And that's the part of it that I can't stand and I think is really kind of gross and disgusting. I always try to keep my private or my profile page. Uh, I just basically I never post anything that's related to me personally. I usually just post things about music and film. Posts for this channel and my Facebook page, whether it's a regular post where I do like a review or a video. I use it for that, and then also for shows that I'm involved in or whatnot. I use it for that obviously all the time. And then this past year, I started an Instagram page for Film Fanatic, and I just use that for purely film stuff. I never been one to really try to engage people on a where I get into debates with people. Occasionally I do, and I'm always like, I don't like doing this because it always, most of the time, it escalates into where it's just really terrible drama and it's super juvenile and pretty toxic in a lot of ways. So I understand people being like, I'm not going to participate or have my information to a degree be known in any kind of public forum. So it's got its great attributes, but it's got its bad attributes to it too. I think as far as how Facebook is and how people carry themselves, there's more negative than anything else. But I think being an artist or a musician, whatever you want to call it, it's pretty vital. Like I don't know how else the transitions moved to that so much over the last few years. I don't know how else you can really promote things, and it does seem to help. I've noticed. I think in the days of flyers and all those things, I think overall it's made things a little bit easier, and people have access to your content a little bit quicker, and you can spread the word, and then also just from being a fan of trying to support events like myself and going to different events. That's the way from that perspective, that's the way I keep up on it, on most things, and also where I'm most aware of how things are, or what's coming, what's happening now, or what's coming up. So and so it's always tricky. And with the YouTube thing, I was really intimidated with starting a YouTube channel for a while because I knew it was going to be. I'd heard it's just essentially it's a lot harder to get traction. But then over time talking to people about it, they said, well, it really just comes down to really, how many times and where and when you share your posts of the videos or things that you put up, when you're adding to your content, what you do with that. And there's bazillion different platforms out there in social media that you can share things to, and they basically gave me advice to say, well, you basically, the more you share it and the more you can tag things, like if people are doing, like say you're doing a movie about horror, for instance, the more things that you tag, where it could be like say you're gothic horror or say Italian horror, the more things that you put in your posts as far as tagging, then when people are Googling certain things, like they're looking up movies in that particular genre, they'll come across your stuff more. So I've really learned a lot more about those kinds of things, and I've noticed that's helped. And one thing I've noticed as far as the YouTube channel goes, it was really slow going, but I noticed the more content I've been putting up, the more traffic was more people were just checking out things, and the more that I tag things for when people would do searches, that seemed to help. And I went from, like, in the beginning of when I started tackling this channel, probably about 4 or 5 months ago, where every couple of weeks I'd get another person who would subscribe or like or something, and it was really slow going. But I noticed since I've been doing videos every day, and I've been trying to make the videos a little bit better and a little more focused on the particular movies I'm talking about, along with the tags, and then also sharing them more and using, hopefully trying to use a better thumbnail or photos to make it more attractive. I've noticed that now it's like every day I would get a new like, and it's definitely increased that. So I've been trying to do that and focus more on that because at the end of the day, it's nice. It's nice to have this channel grow. I would love it to grow as much as I possibly can. There's certain things about it that I really love, and I'm learning. I realize, I'm always, I'm a consummate student, when it comes to these things, and I feel that same. I feel the same way when it comes to music. It's like you never stop learning. I'm not a person who really gets complacent or really comfortable with too many things. There's a lot of things I'm passionate about. When it comes to like music, as far as just being a kind of a fan of music, or kind of, if you want to call it connoisseur of music, and same thing with film. My two biggest interests. You know, I and when it comes to like this channel where I'm doing shows about movies that I love, and then when I'm doing things about music, particularly around my own projects, I realize too that I'm always trying to move forward, and I never get complacent. To a degree, I drive myself nuts. We're all our own worst critics, and I'm definitely my own worst critic. And there's a lot of things I'm proud of that I've done, but I'm always trying to push forward. I never really get comfortable where I'm at. I'm always trying to move a little bit forward, or add something else, or try to strive for the next thing constantly. And I know that's good on one hand, because you want to keep moving forward, and you want to keep acquiring different tools to be able to express yourself. And it's the negative part of it is it causes me to be pretty restless, and to be I don't know, in a weird state of flux, to where I doubt myself a lot of the time. But I've learned, and it was more of a thing in the past, and it's still a thing that I deal with all the time. But I feel as I've gotten older, and now I especially I've learned to embrace that and look at that as actually be actually being a really good thing, and a motivator to kind of keep pushing myself, and to keep practicing, keep working on things, to keep trying to learn this language more. And the biggest thing for me with music, and being a fan of music, even listening to music, and then also with film, the more I dive into those worlds, I find that I'm more inspired by those things more than ever. And so that is a really, for me personally, a real enriching thing. So that really propels me to want to keep learning. So it's a cool thing, but I think it's a little bit struck more of a little bit more of a balance of it. But I've learned to accept those, the adversity around it. So yeah, and as far as new happenings coming up in the world of quantum, and also Film Fanatic, tomorrow on Saturday around 1 o'clock, I'm going to be doing an interview with Callie, who is the manager at Flagship Cinema here in Thomaston, Maine, and we're going to be talking about a topic that I really think about a lot, and I think really affects people. It definitely affects me, and it really affects I think the whole, the sum of all the parts, as far as the entertainment industry, but particularly in film. And the main this we'll talk about a lot of different things, but the main discussion, or kind of focus of our talk, we're going to be doing a live interview in person, will be on how that theater and how movie theaters themselves, whether they're, say privately owned or they're franchises, or how do they, function and try to be successful in this day and age when they're competing with all of these streaming platforms. So I'm really excited for this interview. I think it's going to be a really great one, and it's something I care a lot about. There's been so many changes as far as that goes. There's been so many things of where, you know, lots of theaters have closed. There's also been, a tremendous amount of success given all of the adversity by certain theaters and by certain films that have come out that have still been able to make lots of money. So it's an interesting thing, and that whole way of how people access the content, whether it's music or film, has changed dramatically just within the last 3 or 4 years. Colonial Theater, for instance, just recently closed, which was a beloved, you know, little local mom and pop theater that was cherished by, many people around here, myself included. Recently closed last year, and they were closed for a long time, obviously due to COVID, and then they reopened. But then, it really took they took a hit because people weren't really coming out, so they really tried to reinvent themselves, and they turned what was traditionally a movie theater, they turned it into more of an arts center, and they started having comedy nights, music nights, multiple different things, and related to entertainment. Still a movie theater, but it changed quite a bit, and they were showing lots of classic films, older films, films that had won the Academy Awards in the years past, and not necessarily doing. For a while too, they weren't even showing new releases, which was crazy. And I understood that they needed to adapt to it, but after a while, it became a thing of like, for me, being a film lover and a film fanatic, to me, it that theater wavered itself or became this thing of where it was. I didn't recognize it anymore as really a movie theater anymore, and I knew it was a thing of where they needed to adjust to how things were. But it's and I've seen lots of interviews and discussions about it, and they were talking a lot about how this is like the new model, and they were using other examples of other theaters. There are still theaters that exist, especially in Maine, but there are certain theaters now that have changed to where they're reinventing themselves and using this new model of where it's just not films anymore. So it's interesting. And Flagship is pretty much the only local theater, and it's a franchise. It's a main franchise, and they have locations all over the state. But as far as local, on the local scheme of things, they're the only actual movie theater that is local and within an hour distance, and they almost closed. So, and supposedly this past summer and fall they've been doing really well. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. So I'm really excited about that. So stay tuned. Stay tuned for that interview. That Doing the interview segments for this channel, that is definitely my favorite part of doing this. Um, and the other part that I really love is just talking about a lot of these obscure movies that, where I've said before, I'm always amazed that they seem to get the most traffic. And that to me is a real big source of inspiration for me to keep doing these videos. And also, to kind of dive into that whole world more, because I love all kinds of films and styles, but that world in particular is my favorite, and so I really enjoy it very much. And then also on Saturday night, we will be doing another quantum show. Um, we had a show a week ago or so at the Poor Farm with my friend Tom at Sphere Music, and that was a lot of fun. We hadn't played any gigs in a few months, so I've been trying to like do some things, more events, trying to keep the band a little bit more active this winter. So we have a show coming up this Saturday night at 8 o'clock at the Gypsy Rose Tavern in Camden with Method for Madness, and super excited about that. Hopefully, some folks show up. We're kind of doing or billing that show as more of a like a dance party kind of thing, and it's going to be both of our groups, both of our bands playing, and we're going to be doing all original kind of dance music. So and Method for Madness is tremendous. My friend Spencer Roulard, he was a guest on the show, super talented. I really dig his stuff. It's very atmospheric, but it's modular synth based music and just tremendous music, killer stuff. So he's going to be playing first, and so come check that out. It's going to be 9 o'clock. It's right in Camden. So very excited about that. And I'm moving forward. As far as moving forward with that band with Quantum, I'm still in the process of booking other events and other shows, and trying to get some ideas going. This past year in June, we put out an album. It was our first album in 4 years, and in Dreams I Saw Chapter One. We recorded the album about a year ago, and we put it out in June of this past year. And then this summer was really great, and we played a lot of shows, and we got to, you know, uh, do lots of events. We had an album release party, and at the end of the season, for the most part, we played up until about Halloween. That was when the season kind of tapered off a little bit for us as far as gigs. We ended up selling, pretty much selling out of the album. We only have like a couple of copies left of physical copies of that album. So it was a really great success, and I was really happy. We were able to sell more of our music online through Bandcamp, and so it was really great. And so I was really proud of that album. But during the time of when we recorded that album, we actually recorded two albums, and we broke it up. Originally, it was going to be a double album, but then we realized maybe that's too much, or maybe that's too ambitious, or maybe it's just too much music. So we decided to break it up, and we did it to where it was going to be chapter one, and then the second album that we recorded was going to be in Dreams We Saw, or in Dreams I Saw chapter two, which so we recorded two full length albums in January of last year, and it took us, we had a lot of time to work on the music. We played the summer before. We ended up playing lots of gigs, and then we had been rehearsing a lot, so we got to really work on the material a lot before we went in. And it had been about 4 years since our last album, so I think we were ready to record. It was like the right time, and the timing was really good. And we were, I think all the tunes were battle ready. We had already, really worked out the tunes. We sat with them and lived with them for a long time and got to play them out a lot and really kind of, I think, tried to fine tune them. In previous projects with Quantum, we used to, a lot of the times create a lot of the tracks in studio and kind of piecemeal things together with loose concepts behind them. But the last couple of albums we did it in a totally different way, and that started with our album that came out about 4 years ago, The Stars Beneath Our Feet, where we sat on that material for a couple of years, and we played lots of gigs and rehearsed the material and tried to get it as tight as we can. And then we went into the studio, and we went into the studio, really ready, really prepared. And I noticed since we've been doing that, or at least for that album, it really helped, and it was really great. So we decided to kind of keep that same kind of work ethic. So that's how we recorded those other albums. It was material that we lived with for a long time, played them numerous times at shows, played that material numerous times, and rehearsed them. So I felt like we were ready, and it had been a few years. And so what we're going to probably do this year, in maybe the spring or summertime, depending on how things work out this summer, but I'm in the midst of booking some things later in the year. And I think what we're going to do is release In Dreams I Saw Chapter 2 this year. So why not? I figure why not? It was recorded right around the same time, or literally the same time as the first album. It's a companion. It's chapter two to this whole album. It's like a loosely based concept album. It is and it isn't. So it's, and I'm pretty proud of it. So, and I was really happy with the success of chapter one. So I think we're gonna just put it out and maybe depending on how the gig scenario is and what comes up and what we can land, I think we're gonna, you know, land pick one of those shows as a potential like album release party for Chapter Two. So I'm pretty excited, and I also have been working on this other material in the time being, a whole nother batch of tunes where I'm thinking now this might be a possible down the road another recording project that we'll do as Quantum, and that's going to be more of a, you know, I have a whole concept around it, but it's going to be more of an EP, a shorter album. But I have about 5 or 6 tunes that I've written this, well, last year now, and then also this year. I recently, the last 5 or 6 months, since the summer, fall, and then in wintertime, I've been working on this new material, and it's about 5 to 6 new tunes, and some of them are kind of lengthy, but they're all like oddly really really connected, and there's this kind of weird concept behind the whole thing, and I'm thinking of, you know, as far as recording in the future, I'm thinking of recording this whole thing together as a definite concept album, and have it as all like one cohesive kind of piece of music, and putting it out as like an EP of where it's going to be a shorter condensed album, but definitely a concept album. And so yeah, that's one thing I've been thinking about and working on a lot, and it's been I'm kind of excited about it because the material is quite a bit different. I think with the new stuff, there's still some dance stuff, but the newer tunes that I have been working on are a little bit more ambient based. They're a little bit more mellow, but they're definitely, I feel like they're also a little bit more melodic. They're slower. They're a little bit more ambient based, and they have a little bit more of a, I don't know, a little bit more of a deeper kind of cinematic influence, and that comes from films. So we'll see. You know, so that as a future prospect for us to record more music, that's something I'm thinking about doing. And so yeah, so today's show is a movie that I have to say is probably one of the greatest horror movies ever made. I think it's one of the greatest, or probably one of the biggest, and one of the most influential horror movies ever made. One of my all-time favorites. I bought this finally on Blu-ray. I've had it for a couple of years, and I was super excited when I bought it. This is a movie that, again, I was raised on, used to watch all the time back in the day. I grew up watching it on VHS. I saw it many times at cable, late night, all the late night horror TV series that were on. And that is The Wicker Man, the original Wicker Man. It came out in 1975, and it was directed by Robin Hardy, and it stars the iconic Christopher Lee. And also Edward Woodard, Ingrid Pitt, Britt Eklund, Diane Cliento, Paul Giovanni, and Jerry Galper. And The Wicker Man is basically, it's a British folk horror movie, and it's probably one of the most influential, what I would call like occult horror based movies. It's basically centered on this cop who goes to this small little island in England, and he's there to, he gets stranded, and there's like these series of events where these people start disappearing, and he realizes that there are people getting killed, and that there's this essentially this cult uh, on this island, and he eventually becomes pulled into this cult further and further. And it's got the, you know, the incredible scene of where essentially he's burnt alive at the end. That's like, it's like one of the most iconic scenes, you know, in all of horror. And this film really, like, I felt like as a kid, this was like the first, one of the first movies that I saw as a kid that had this occult aesthetic. And this was one of the films too that really was, I'm a huge fan of reading about things. One of my favorite topics is anything related to, you know, I love esoteric subjects, but anything related to the occult. And this was probably the movie that kind of introduced me to it. It pulled from a lots of different. This story pulled a lot from a lot of ancient practices, from the Druids to lots of ancient practices from the pagans, and there is some application of truth to it. Um, well, like one influence and one thing I feel like this movie was influenced by is you know the Druids, which was an ancient form of pagan religion, and they had this ritualistic aspect of where they more or less believed in human sacrifice, but they also believed in more or less living in harmony with nature, and that they would have this one ritualistic practice of where they would take their criminals, like say the criminal part of their population, and put them in these baskets and basically burn them alive to kind of increase fertility, or the next season of crops. They believed very much in human sacrifice, but they also had this thing of where they were very conscious of what they did, or what their relationship was to what they believed was Mother Nature, or these gods that they worshipped, and they believed in these gods to a degree of where they lived and breathed them, and they looked at them not in just a metaphorical or a mythological sense, but they believed that they were, you know, uh, literal characters, and that they oversaw people's daily lives. And for me, uh, like Christopher Lee, for instance, he is like one of my all-time favorites. Probably my favorite, quote unquote, horror icon. You have Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff. There's so many great. Lon Chaney Jr. Those guys are from the Universal monster world, the classic monsters. There, and there's so many great icons, but for me, Christopher Lee is probably my man. He's like the most influential, and my favorite. And I grew up watching him in all of the classic Hammer movies where he played Dracula. Overall, there's so many great vampire movies out there, and there's so many great uh, additions or actors and films that have played the iconic Dracula, based on Bram Stoker's book. But Christopher Lee was my first introduction to the character that was known as Dracula, and that was, again, I have all of the Hammer films, and the Hammer company was a British company that started in the late 50s. They went through the late 50s, 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, where and they actually still do exist. But their heyday was late 50s, like 57, 58, through about, the early 80s. So they had this long, especially in the 70s, or I should say, especially in the 60s and 70s, they were huge. It was a huge company, and they were a British company that basically made they took artistic license with the Universal monsters. They would take these characters and kind of reinvent them and do lots of different things with them. And most notably was around the iconic characters Dracula. And Christopher Lee made, I don't know how many movies. Must have made about 10 to 12 different movies that were based on the Dracula character. And that whole thing was such an integral part of my childhood. That was my introduction to vampires and vampirism and Dracula. And there's, like I said, there's so many different incarnations of Dracula since then, and as well as vampire movies. But at the end of the day, Christopher Lee is like, he was my favorite actor who ever portrayed Dracula. And this was the first movie I remember seeing of him when because Christopher Lee was a really prolific actor. He was a stage actor, but he did many different kinds of roles. And this was like one of the first movies I saw that was a non Dracula role. And I just fell in love with this movie. This movie is super weird and bizarre. Also, it's got this weird. I kind of feel like this movie is definitely not only one of the greatest and most iconic and one of the most influential horror movies ever. I think it's like one of the greatest kind of low budget exploitation movies in a lot of ways. Um, and one of the biggest, I think one of the greatest and easily one of the most iconic horror movies ever released. I mean, this I feel like this film influenced so many movies uh, to such a degree that it's kind of limited to where it took horror. Uh, and the thing is too, it really I think this movie pushed the boundaries as far as like sexual content, like because this movie's pretty sleazy. It's got a lot of and it's pretty weird. It's pretty strange. It's got a lot of like surrealistic things to it that are just very interesting. One movie I think recently that came out within the last few years is by Ari Aster called Midsummer. He's actually one of my favorite newer horror directors, and I feel like that movie, the original Wicker Man, was a tremendous influence on Midsummer. Like especially with the whole pagan, the druid influence, and incorporating that mythology into the film and into the storyline. Um, there's another film that came out a few years ago, which is a really awesome movie, which I eventually want to do a show on called The Kill List, which I think was really influenced by The Wicker Man. There's a whole bunch of other movies. The cool thing too about those two examples is they did something a little bit different. You can see the influence, but they're not at all ripping off the movie. Definitely influence, but they're their own thing. And that's what I loved about, like in particular Midsummer, is that it huge influence from because of the use of the aesthetic of Wicker Man, where they use a lot of this like, occult symbolism, and they talk a lot about they bring in the aspects of a lot of ancient pagan practices, especially in Eastern European during the Eastern European time of where nature was kind of the core aspect of that philosophy or that ritualistic practice, and man's and woman's connection to that and how that was a really important thing. But they also believed in a multitude of gods, and they also believed them in them in a literal sense and how to appease them. And they also believed to a degree of various forms of human sacrifice. Um, but the overall pageantry, the use of masks, and the costumes that were used, the real heavy duty ritualistic aspect of it, uh, from The Wicker Man was such a huge influence on these other films, and as well as many other films outside of that. This was, I had way ahead of its time. Like I said, it's super wacky, it's super funny. It's got this real surrealistic quality to it. Kind of feels like an acid trip. The music is just incredible. It's got one of the most iconic film scores ever. Um, One of probably as much as I love Christopher Lee as Dracula, overall my favorite. He was my he my favorite. When I think of Christopher Lee, I think of him as Dracula. He that was my favorite incarnation of Dracula. But I think overall, like this is probably my favorite role of his. I mean, so many movies he was involved with in his long career. Most notably on the more recent side, until he passed away, he was Saruman in the Lord of the Rings movies, and then also Count Dooku in Star Wars. But just amazing, just an amazing figure, and his whole presence is just amazing. And it's so cool to see him play a different role, where he's like essentially the leader of this cult that lives on this island, and he's got lots of different facets. He's very articulate, he's very mysterious. You don't. and he's a very dark character, but he's got lots of different shades. And I love the thing about the Wicker Man is it's got this real subtle kind of introduction to where you notice things are kind of off, and you start realizing there's layers to what's going on here, and the further you get into it, you realize that this is this like cult, and there is this like conspiracy, and that you are being pulled into this. And it's got like the one of the greatest, if not the greatest, like endings in a horror movie. Period. Like it's just incredible, and it's so like I feel like every time I've seen this movie, I always feel, even though I've seen it so many times, it's one of the most disturbing scenes ever, where they lure this guy in, and they essentially burn him alive, and how there's like this communal celebration of it, and it's just like one of the most iconic scenes, and I think one of the most disturbing scenes in all things horror, and anything horror based. And I was super excited when I bought this on Blu-ray, because this collection, or this package, is just like incredible. It's all remastered. The picture is just amazing. The digital transfer from the original film and negative is just unbelievable. Um, the music is all restored. The film score, soundtrack, the special features on here are just incredible. It's so interesting, and they go into such detail about how this film came out, and they also interview other horror film directors, and they talk about how this is like one of the defining moments of horror, and how it's one of, not only one of the greatest horror films ever, but also one of the most influential. And it was directed by Robin Hardy. And Robin Hardy was an English author and film director. His most famous films were The Wicker Man, and his last project, which was the film adaptation for Cowboys for Christ. That's pretty strange. He's done a few other films. The Fantasist, Burnt Offerings, which I didn't realize that's a great movie. The Buildings, Grudge Match. He's directed things all the way up in 2013. That's so bizarre. Uh, and but most notable, his biggest project that he was ever involved in was The Wicker Man. I mean, it's one of the most iconic, movies ever. And it's funny because I love Nicolas Cage. I am a huge Nicolas Cage fan, and I've never, um, I've never seen the remake. There was a remake that came out, I believe, of The Wicker Man about 10 or 12 years ago, and I never saw it for some reason. I love, like, sometimes I have weird things about remakes. I think there are some examples of really great remakes out there. I think one of the best remakes out there is probably, say, for instance, the Evil Dead remake. I think that's a tremendous take on the whole thing. And I think also another modern example is the Invisible Man remake. Generally, I'm not a huge fan of remakes. I kind of feel a lot of the times they're kind of watered down. The newer, more contemporary versions of those classic films, they tend to be really watered down, and the ratings are like, they don't have the R rating. They're PG now, or PG-13. I think of certain films that were remakes. Like, some examples that I think are really bad are, um, there was a Total Recall remake that came out a few years ago with Colin Farrell, which was really bad, and then also RoboCop. And those are two, especially RoboCop, iconic '80s, sci-fi movies. And they were both, like, I felt really watered down. They had like a PG-13 rating, and I just didn't get it. Like, why even do that? Whereas, like, the original versions, especially, RoboCop. They're super brutal. It's a super brutal movie. But I had heard that I've been aware of the Wicker Man remake for years, and I love Nicolas Cage. I think especially now with his whole, his career, he's in this renaissance, at this phase in his life, and he's just been doing so many amazing movies. But I just, for some reason, I just haven't seen it, and I don't know. At some point, I need to see it. I've heard it's like completely batshit crazy for the most part. But the thing that I've come across most of the time, and it's come up like, well, it's pretty much happened every time, but every time I've gotten in a conversation with somebody about the Wicker Man, that person's usually always referring to the remake, which I haven't seen. And I should see it, but I just haven't seen it. And it's one of those things. And what I've come across is that a lot of people don't realize that it's actually a remake, and they've never seen or even heard of the original one, which came out in '73. Just crazy, just crazy. And a lot of the times, people don't know who Christopher Lee is, which I think is kind of insane. But just as a quick, I mean, so many movies that Christopher Lee was involved in. The Man with the Golden Arm, 1974. The Lord of the Rings movies, Hugo, The Torture Chamber, Extraordinary Tales, just and like I said, the list of Dracula and all of the Hammer films he's done is just unbelievable. The Curse of Frankenstein, The Mummy, Dracula, Prince of Darkness. He was actually in The Corpse Bride too, which is crazy. Uh, my favorite Dracula movie, and I don't own it. My favorite Hammer film, my favorite rendition of the classic Hammer Dracula films is the one that came out in 1958. I unfortunately don't own any of the Hammer films on Blu-ray. I think I have one. I have them all on DVD. I don't know why that is, but I have all of the movies. I have pretty much have the entire collection. I have definitely have all of the Dracula films. But I only have Dracula 1958 on VHS, which is kind of a crying shame. But that movie is such an amazing movie. Like it's just his whole thing, Christopher Lee, his whole presence on screen is just like he's just got this certain level of intensity, and he's just got this commanding presence that I feel in film history is just unprecedented. He doesn't he was one of those actors that he could just be on screen or be on a stage somewhere with a camera on him, and he doesn't have to say anything, and he's just got this presence that's just like is piercing. Um, yeah, just unbelievable. And he and I felt like throughout his career he always maintained that. Um, Count Dracula in 1970. He was in Sleepy Hollow, amazing. He was in Gremlins. He was in the Lord of the Rings movies. The Satanic Rites of Dracula, which is another one that I just love to death. Dracula has risen from his grave. The Hound of the Baskervilles. Um, the Scars of Dracula. The Last Unicorn. Gina. Uh, Taste of Taste of Blood of Dracula, which is another awesome movie. I really love Dracula AD. That's an awesome movie. It's a real like 70s. It's got this real 70s vibe to it. All this great like kind of funk music in it. The Resident, Horror Hotel, 1960. Doctor Terror's House of Horror. The Devil Rides Out. That's an awesome movie. I haven't seen that in so long. Um, to the Devil and His Daughter. He played Rasputin also. The House That Dripped Blood. Blood of the Virgins. The Torture. The Blood of Fu Manchu, another iconic role that he played. I mean, just amazing. Um, and so, I mean, I can't say enough good things about this film. I mean, it's just such an iconic movie, and the Blu-ray transfer of this film is just incredible. and it's got one of the best bonus or special features packages I've ever seen. The other thing that's really cool about this is Woodward, who is the cop who's investigating this crime. He was a pretty famous actor. Um, he was a real famous stage actor for a long time in London, and also he was a stage actor on Broadway. Pretty wild. And the other thing that he was probably the most famous for, was he did this series in the '80s called The Equalizer, which was a show that I remember seeing a lot as a kid. And then he did The Wicker Man before that in '73. Callahan was another series he did, or Kalan in 1967. Pretty iconic actor. He mostly was well known for a lot of his TV roles, particularly The Equalizer. But just such an awesome movie. One of the creepiest movies ever made, and also, when people talk about horror movies that generally scare you or disturb you, I think this is definitely one of those movies. But it's also like really sleazy and funny. Um, Tons of suspense, and just amazing atmosphere. It's super trippy. It's got this real like '70s, '60s like psychedelic vibe to it. The music is just amazing. The cinematography is amazing, and I just love and how it really is this real interesting, slow gaining of knowledge as to what's actually happening in the film. And it's a nice slow burn to where you discover, uh, you know, what's really actually happening, what's transpiring, and then it brings you to this like climactic ending. Like I said, I think it's one of the greatest endings ever for movies in general, but definitely for horror. I mean, I just can't get enough of this movie, and one of my all-time favorites, The Wicker Man. So please get a chance, get to see this. This is a must-see, and eventually I'll see the remake. I don't know when, but it will happen. So this is Jason Dean, and thanks again for this early morning edition of Film Fanatic. Please like and subscribe to this channel if you get a chance, and we will see you next time. Peace.